my name is Georgina and I am a Senior Student Recruitment Officer here at Keele University. I'm really pleased to be joined by Dr. Rebecca Leach, Dr. Tony Kieran and Dr. John Howlett from the School of Social, Political and Global Studies. Within this session, we're going to be giving you an overview of the school and the opportunities that are available to some of our students. But before we get into the session, I'll hand over to the panel to introduce themselves. So over to you, Rebecca.
Hi, good morning. I'm Dr. Rebecca Leach. I'm a senior lecturer in sociology at Keele, and I work on, broadly speaking, research into consumer cultures and home cultures.
John?
Hi everyone, my name is Dr. John Howlett. I am a lecturer in education here at Keele and I'm the Programme Director for undergraduate education, and my research comprises investigations into progressive education and the history of schooling and education.
Thank you. And Tony?
Hello, I'm Tony Kieran. I'm one of the senior lecturers in criminology at Keele. I'm also the Programme Director for Criminology. So students get to see me a lot in the course of the criminology programme.
Brilliant. So we've got sort of representation from criminology, education and sociology, which we'll be exploring throughout this session. Before we jump into sort of the specifics of the courses that we are offering, Rebecca, could I come to you first? And could you perhaps give us a bit of an overview of the ethos of the School of Social, Political and Global Studies and what the school is really about?
Sure, yeah. The school is a broad school of social sciences. So we have, as well as criminology, education and sociology, we also cover politics, international relations, and then some subjects that are aligned to social sciences but are more specific, like philosophy and liberal arts. I think it's a school that covers such a wide range of topics, but they're actually very cognate. They work together in lots of ways, so it's really good if you can combine subjects, for example, within the school. It's a school that's got a strong commitment to research-led teaching. So the school is full of people at the cutting edge of their subjects and their disciplines, and they take that fresh and thoughtful approach into their teaching. So you really are being taught by people who are really on it in terms of their own subject area. And there's also a wide range of people, particularly in our side of the school, the criminology and education side in particular, who work in or with agencies and public sector organisations that deal with those more applied or public facing areas. So, for example, I'm sure John will talk about the relationship to teaching and Tony will talk about the relationship to the criminal justice system. And I think the ethos of the school is about critical thinking. The kind of analytical engagement and open thought that the social sciences, liberal arts and philosophy are famous for. But at the same time, we also know that students who come to subjects often are the kind of students who want to go out and make a difference in the world, whether that's in, you know, civic engagement, citizenship, volunteering, working in those organisations where they can really help and change things, or whether it's just, you know, taking their critical social science thinking into the world of entrepreneurialism and business. So yeah, we like to make a difference, and we are proud of our students for doing so in everything they do.
That's brilliant. That's great. Thank you for that, Rebecca. And Tony, if I can come to you, could you give us a brief overview of the criminology programme and the types of modules that students can expect to study on criminology? You know, what does it really entail?
Yeah, sure. I mean, criminology at Keele has a really long history. Keele was the first university in Britain to offer an undergraduate criminology degree, which means we've got just shy of 30 years worth of graduates who've gone on to work in the Home Office, policing, prisons, community safety, crime reduction, probation, etc. In this country, but also around the world. So I think it's fair to say we've got a pretty good sense of what's involved in the delivery of a criminology programme. I mean, obviously, what we do maps onto the British Society of Criminology requirements for a named degree in criminology. So we cover all of the basics, all of the foundational knowledge. We look at prisons, we look at the criminal justice system, we look at policing, we look at the causes of crime, we look at the things that make people commit crime, we look at victims of crime, we look at the impacts of crime on society. And I think the one thing that kind of underpins all of that is that we don't just look at these as kind of abstract academic issues. There's very much a kind of strong focus on the notion of, okay, we know these things about this problem. We know these things about why people commit crime. We know these things about the impact of crime on its victims. We know that these things seem to work and these things seem to not work. But then the follow-on question is always, and what do we do about it? So there's a really strong focus. Rebecca's already referred to the fact that there is a strong tradition of research-informed teaching. The criminologists at Keele are all research active. They're all practitioner criminologists. We're out working with police forces, probation services, youth justice services, etc. And we're feeding that research back into what we teach. So there's a very strong emphasis on it's kind of critically challenging. We ask lots of difficult questions, lots of challenging questions about crime in our society and what we do about it. But that's also rooted in a very kind of practical ethos about the application of that knowledge in the world to make a difference. So there's a good interrelationship between us and external partners.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And like you say, the most important thing is that students don't necessarily just learn the theory, but they know how to apply that in the real world, and they've got those skills. How, within the criminology programme, how do students do that? You know, is it sort of the teaching methods and how they learn? How do you really prepare students for the world of work?
Good question. I mean, essentially, the way we think about it, we very much treat the first year of the programme as it's an introduction to criminology. We work on the assumption that a lot of our students may not have actually studied criminology before they come to us. There are a small number of criminology programs in further education, in sixth form colleges, etc. But for most of the students that come to us, they may have studied some crime and deviance in the psychology A level or the sociology A level. But we work on the assumption that the first year is about introducing students to criminology. So we introduce them in the first half of the first year. All of our students take a module called Understanding Crime, which is about understanding crime. We look at all of the kind of theoretical toolkit, the various attempts to explain and understand crime. And then in the second semester, students, we have a focus on, there's a module, Criminal Justice Process Policy Practice. And that takes all of those theories from semester one, all of those arguments, and actually applies them to real criminal justice systems. And we look at what works, but also in particular, we look at the kind of tensions between what should work in theory and what does work in practice. We look at some of the practical obstacles and some of the practical challenges, and it's very much rooted in the kind of realities of delivering criminal justice. And we follow that. So the first year is about learning about criminology. The second year is about learning to be a criminologist. And the second year, there's a large element of research skills development. We also have a module called Working for Justice, where we bring back, I mean, one of the benefits of having kind of 30 years worth of criminology graduates to draw on is we bring back senior police officers and prison governors and probation officers and a range of Keele graduates who work in the criminal justice system to come and talk to our students about the reality of doing the job. We really want our students to make informed choices, not just apply for the job that they imagine, but apply for the job that they have some kind of opportunities to have a kind of warts and all conversation with practitioners. And then we move on to the third year, and the focus there, you know, the first year is about understanding criminology, the second year is about becoming a criminologist, and the third year is about what kind of criminologist you want to be. So we design the third year of our programme to maximise student choice. The only compulsory module in the third year is the dissertation for single honours criminology students, because we think it's important for single honours criminology students to demonstrate that they can conduct an individual piece of research on a criminological topic. But beyond that, the third year is made up of option choices by students. So students can pick the modules that reflect where they see themselves 9 months down the line after graduation. And that includes, at the moment, we have a year-long module, which is a criminology placement module in the third year, where essentially students apply to do that as if they were applying for a job, and then they're placed for a day a week with one of our external partners. And that's worked really well for the last few years. We are in the process of revamping that. We're constantly kind of reviewing that element of what we do. So actually a student coming in October as a first year, in October of next year, will be, by the time they get to the third year, I think the chances are that the kind of vocational placement element will have developed and expanded. And in some respects might be quite different to what we do at the moment. Yeah. But yeah, there's a real focus. We want our students to be able to engage with complex theories, but also to have a clear sense of how you actually use those complex theories out in the real world to make a difference.
Yeah, that's really useful, and I think there's a lot of commonality there between some of the other programs. So John, if we come to you, obviously Tony was talking about those sort of critical analysis skills and being able to apply them in the workplace. Could you give us an overview of the education programme at Keele, and how, and again, how students are prepared for the world of work and employment?
Of course, yeah. And as Tony says, as with criminology, education has also got a long history at being at Keele. So we've been running education programs and working with schools and teachers in the area for, again, 30, 40 years. One of the key things about our program, I think, is that we really ask students to consider what the big questions in education are. So, for example, what people should have to study at school. If I were to ask anybody to make a list of the things they think people should need to know and understand when they leave school, it would probably be very different, to somebody else's list. So there's a real debate about what people should have to study. There's a big debate as to the best ways that children learn. There's a big debate as to why certain people, certain groups in society perform better in education than others. So these big questions, I think, form the basis of the we really want to do is to encourage students to come out of our 3-year degree having a view, having an informed opinion on those issues, and we feed those issues and questions into all of the modules that we do. So the modules that we offer don't just look at education in terms of this is what you need to know to go and teach, but they ask those big questions about education. They ask those questions through looking at, for example, the psychology of education, how children learn, which is one of our first year modules. Then we look at the history of education, so how education has developed across time from the 1830s through to the present day. We look at the sociology of education in terms of race, in terms of work. There's opportunities as well for students to pursue the things that interest them through their second year project and then their third year dissertation. So we're covering education in all sorts of different ways, whether that's, as I say, psychologically, sociologically, historically, or philosophically. And we feel that giving students this critical way of thinking, which I know Tony talked about in relation to criminology, but giving students this critical way of thinking makes them come out, first of all, if they want to go into teaching, as many of our students do, it makes them better teachers, because they are always questioning and asking questions of the things that they're expected to do. But also, of course, it gives them a range of transferable skills if they want to go into other areas. So a lot of our graduates, well, not a lot of our graduates, but probably about 20% of our graduates choose not to go into teaching and maybe pursue further academic study, social work, working with, say, play therapy, going into prisons to work with young people. There's a range of careers that our students go into, but most of them have at the core a sort of a focus on working with young people. And hopefully they come out with that sort of critical mindset that we seek to develop. And as I say, the modules cover a whole range of different educational issues, and there's plenty of opportunity for you to explore what interests you within the program itself.
Yeah, brilliant. It sounds like you're really preparing sort of really well-rounded practitioners that actually understand those bigger, areas external to, how to teach and that kind of thing. And Rebecca, John picked up on something there that I know is quite prominent in the sociology programme about things like opportunities and, how people's backgrounds can actually impact their longer term, futures and that kind of thing. Could you perhaps give us an idea on the sociology programme?
Sure, yeah. So just to add to what John and Tony have said, I mean, in the story of longevity and how long we've been doing it, we have to claim we win that one, because we've been teaching sociology at Keele since 1969, which gives us a 50-year trajectory. So yeah, it's been around for a very long time. I mean, obviously it's been around for hundreds of years as a discipline. And I think what we do as a sort of primary discipline that often underpins many of those more applied areas, such as criminology, education, social work, and so on. We really provide students with the core conceptual and critical ballast that they need to kind of unpick and understand what's going on in the world at large. And just to sort of pick up on something about work readiness and enabling students from all kinds of backgrounds to make the transition into university and then beyond. We're, first of all, I think we're very open. All our disciplines at Keele are very open to students from non-traditional educational backgrounds, and what we do is really value students who want to study the subject. It doesn't matter to some degree what your qualifications are coming in, as long as you make the appropriate grades. We're interested in your interest in the subject, not what you've necessarily learned before. So you don't need to have studied, for example, sociology, criminology, or education specifically to take degrees in our subjects. And we're very keen to encourage people to bring their interest to us. But then it's our responsibility to translate that into high quality abilities as people move through the degree, wherever they come from. So we work really hard to embed high level thinking in our graduates, and I think that's probably the key approach of all non-vocational university education. It's about enabling students to really hone their key skills, and those key skills are graduate level skills that are really, really important. So to some degree, all of our disciplines do that. But those ones that are in the kind of primary disciplinary areas really focus in on that. I mean, just to give you an example, George, the World Economic Forum, its top 5 skills for 2020 that the world needs in terms of graduate and high level employment, they're analytical thinking, active learning, complex problem solving, critical thinking, and creativity and initiative. And those are really non-vocational skills that only, sort of engagement in them in a very active way can really teach you. So that's precisely what university does. And I think our discipline of sociology does that, exceptionally well. Our job is to train students in creative, critical and analytical thinking. So, I think we're proud of that, really. I think sociology's, and actually across the whole school, we're all working towards more work experience opportunities for students, both in terms of formal and informal placements. I mean, just for example, in sociology, our students do get out there anyway and do things like volunteering in the local area in particular, but also across the university. They've been heavily involved in food bank collections. They've been heavily involved in, changing the environment around them and putting their sociological skills to use. But also, I think the specifics of the kinds of experience they have, there's nothing like having to stand up in front of a classroom of people and present your work. That really sharpens your mind in terms of how you're going to engage out there with perhaps people you don't know, perhaps people you've never worked with before, and that's the kind of key, practice area, I suppose, for our students. And their written work is the same. The dissertation is the pinnacle of their university experience, and it's a long self-authored piece of work which works one-to-one with a supervisor, and that's probably the most work-like thing for many of the careers that our students will go into that they will do. It's a report that takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of thinking and a lot of skill, and requires people to take guidance and to manage their time over a long period of time, and then produce something highly professional. So for many students, the dissertation in sociology is the thing that they're most proud of, and we're most proud of, because they produce exceptional work. So although I didn't want to dwell just on the subject matter of the course, which of course I can do if you want me to, I also wanted to get that point across that really, you know, the kind of skills and talents that university graduates come out with are really, they're often there in the people who apply, but it's our job to bring them out and to really hone them.
Yeah, hone those skills and really sort of tailor them to what the world needs right now.
Yeah.
John, if I could just come back to you. Rebecca touched on the fact that students don't necessarily need to have studied criminology, education, sociology before they get to a full degree programme. But what piece of advice could you give to a student who hasn't and perhaps doesn't feel necessarily ready for a full degree programme? So could you perhaps just talk about our foundation year and how students can prepare for a degree? So if they're thinking, what can I be doing now? Should I be reading something? Should I be getting myself involved in something? What would you advise them?
Well, in terms of education, no, you're absolutely right. There isn't an education A-level or GCSE, so all students are kind of coming at this with a blank canvas, if you like. And we welcome applications from students with all sorts of A-level combinations or BTECs or now the new T-levels, whether you've got kind of a sciencey background or an arts background, that doesn't really matter. In terms of doing sort of preparatory work for the education programme, very briefly, my advice would be, first of all, I mean, there are some books that I could recommend, but my best advice would, well, there'd be two things I'd recommend. First of all, find out what's going on in education today. So go onto the BBC web pages, look at the kind of stories, and my goodness me, there's a lot of stories now about education with the recent school closures during the pandemic. So find out the kind of news stories that are going on, find out what the big issues are. And then from that, go and have a look. And I know maybe it's not the usual thing for you to do, but go and have a look at maybe some newspapers. So things like the Telegraph, the Times, the Independent, the Guardian, the kind of the four big broadsheet newspapers, and just have a look at their education pages, because they will come at issues with particular perspectives. And the thing is, when we think about education, education is political, and it's often driven by political agendas. So you'll have a different range of perspectives and opinions on education. So just read through those newspapers, read through the BBC pages and see the sorts of issues and debates that are happening now. That would be my first piece of advice. The second piece of advice, and this is particularly relevant if you want to teach, and many of our students I know do want to teach, is try and get as much experience in schools as you can. This counts for so much when you're looking to apply for the sort of teacher training programs, the graduate teacher training programs after our degree. So we have a 3-year program, and then you do a 1-year teacher training program after that. That's the kind of standard UK model. But get as much experience as you can, either in, you know, your local school or maybe your old school, in the sector that you're interested in. So if you want to go into primary school teaching, go and volunteer and work in a primary school. Go and volunteer in a secondary school if you're interested in doing secondary teaching, and get some experience. And when you're doing the experience, you know, write it down. I always say to students, you know, when you're compiling your sort of CV and thinking about what you've done, write down the sorts of activities that you did with the children, write down the sorts of involvement that you have, and write down anything that you observe or you kind of makes you think about what's going on in the classroom. So I'd say that for people applying for education, that would be my piece of advice. More generally, to come back to your point about the foundation year, yeah, I mean, Keele does offer a very, very good foundation year, which is the year that you take a year before you go into year 1. So this might be for students, for example, whose A-level grades are slightly lower than the entry tariff. It might be for people coming in with no A-levels or no post-16 qualifications. It might be for people coming back into education after an extended period. And the foundation year is an excellent thing to do if you're maybe a bit unsure about whether university is right, whether you're a bit unsure about your qualifications, because it prepares you, as Rebecca says, you know, it prepares you for getting into that critical thinking mindset. It asks questions, not just about the subject that you might want to study for your degree, but about the social sciences and the humanities more generally. And if you look at the Keele web pages or you speak to people like Georgina, they'll be able to give you a lot more information about the foundation year. But it's something that if you are perhaps a little bit uncertain about what qualifications you've got, or you might not have the qualifications that Keele demands, I think the foundation year is a fantastic thing to do, because it gets you back into study and it gets you thinking in the sorts of ways that university demands. And on the education programme, probably about 15–20% of our students have gone through that foundation year, and I think it stands them in really good stead for hitting the assignments in year 1.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, John. And Tony, just to come back to you, John spoke a little bit there about actually having an awareness of what is going on in the real world is actually really important in terms of preparing for a degree. Obviously, within criminology, a lot of our academics are really sort of research active and are, working in the world of criminology at the moment. How does that benefit students, and do students get sort of an insight through sort of your experiences through your teaching?
Yeah, they certainly do. I think the kind of philosophy of what we do at Keele in criminology is very much focused on the idea that we are constantly reviewing and refreshing what we do, particularly in the second year and the third year. A big chunk of the first year, because it's about kind of introduction to criminology and criminological theory. A lot of it is the kind of history of criminological thought and all the different kind of arguments and theories that have emerged. But in the second year and the third year, we're constantly reviewing what we do. So, for example, this year, third year students are taking a module on youth crime and youth justice, which is delivered by a new member of staff with a very strong background in the probation service, youth justice system and the prison service. So yeah, I mean, we're out at the moment. For example, we've got a colleague who's doing a significant amount of work around road safety. We have there is a national network of road safety and roads policing research, which is based at Keele, and that's feeding through. It's feeding through into undergraduate teaching. It's feeding through into postgraduate teaching. So, I mean, I think one of the things that I really like about what we do is that we're not just teaching to the textbook. Yeah. We're not just kind of, let's all look at chapter 5 and see what chapter 5 says. We're actually feeding stuff in that. I mean, I did a big piece of work that was funded by the College of Policing, which I teach the second year policing module, and I've been talking to the second year students on the policing module about the stuff that we did in that research project, which hasn't yet made it through into any textbooks. So that there are opportunities to get kind of advanced access to new arguments, new theories, new developments. And that's one of the things I really like. I think that's one of the things that it's really important, is at the heart of what we do.
Yeah. Such a dynamic way of teaching as well, isn't it? And sort of, I think that actually just summarises how Keele approaches education, that it is sort of dynamic and adaptable. Rebecca, coming back to you, Tony touched there on sort of the opportunities that are available to students. Are you able to give us an idea on the additional opportunities in addition to sort of the academic areas of the teaching that students can get themselves involved in?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, George. I've mentioned volunteering. Obviously, we have a really well organised volunteering programme that runs via the Student Union, and students can actually gain credit for taking part in that, so they can add to their academic experience and use their time effectively. I think the first thing I want to say is about the opportunities to sort of break out of your core discipline or disciplines a little bit on the Keele programme. It's structured so that students have the opportunity to take what we call electives from other areas. So, for example, a single honours sociology student could still take a criminology or an education module if they wanted to, but equally they could take a computer science module and things that are perhaps developing career options in future, or perhaps you want to keep up with your interest in history or English literature. So there's a small amount of space for students to do that, but there is breadth. I mean, just for example, I think John's students do this a lot. You can take a teaching English as a second language route. You can also learn a language if you've got some either basic or advanced proficiency. So all of these options are available within the programme for students, and that's a real strong benefit of the way our programme is structured. And then the other opportunities that exist are around travel. So we really think and hold on to the idea that university is really about broadening the mind and widening your horizons. And as well as meeting lots of different kinds of people at university and learning to debate and discuss things with people who you really fundamentally disagree with, but in a civilized way, We also think it's important for students to look at the world differently, and one of the very best ways for them to do that is to travel within the kind of safe confines of their degree when it's possible. It's obviously a little challenging at the moment, but in more normal times, we have students who take a study abroad period. So, for example, they might take a semester in a partner university, typically in English-speaking countries like Canada, the United States, Australia, and some Scandinavian or European universities where they teach in English. Obviously, if there's proficiency in a second language, then it makes it slightly easier. But it's a very popular route for a number of students, and we send a few each year from each programme to do that study abroad semester. And that normally happens at the beginning of the second year, and students don't pause their studies, they just translate the core subjects that they would do at Keele to similar kinds of things at another university, and then they return after that semester. We've got really well established, long-standing relationships with our partner universities, so the students are well supported in both choosing and once they take up that opportunity. And then the other kinds of option are an intermission or a period in between the second and the third year, where a student might take a whole year either to study. So we have what's called the international year, and the students do a programme usually across 2 universities for the year, and that's added to their degree certificate, and it adds value, and often they might take subjects that are cognate with their main degree, or they might take something additional. I mean, for example, we sometimes have students who travel to the United States and for 6 months do journalism to add to their kind of, their portfolio, and then they might go to a Canadian university to study, anthropology to add to their sociology. So that's a really good model for students who are kind of ambitious and wanting to travel, but in a kind of managed way. And then we now, for most programmes, not all yet, but certainly in the next 1 to 2 years, almost all programmes will have this built in our school, and that's the idea of a placement year. So rather than doing in-module placements, the notion of being able to again take a full year of an internship or paid placement, which Keele helps to facilitate, and again it's added to the programme and the credit system, not the credit system, but the certificate that the student gets at the end, so they graduate with a placement year. So there's lots of both informal and formal opportunities for students to support their studies. I mean, obviously the Student Union runs a whole programme of societies and clubs, and many students get involved in those, both for fun, but also with that kind of idea of work experience and career building in mind. They often run them and get involved in organising. That's a really fantastic thing to sort of test your organisational and management skills while you're at university. So
yeah, brilliant. So many opportunities to tailor your degree to sort of where you're hoping to end up. And I suppose for students who aren't quite sure whether they want to go to university or travel, actually our programmes have got that flexibility to be able to do both, so you get the best of both worlds.
Absolutely.
John, just coming back to you, just as we're sort of wrapping up, I just wanted to talk about the fact that going to university and all this can actually seem quite overwhelming for some students. So how does the school support their students through their studies? What systems are in place to support students through their academic studies?
Well, there's 2 avenues of support. I mean, first of all, the school itself has a strong support network. So, for example, every student in the school, and again, this is across the university, but every student in our school will have a personal tutor who is assigned to you, and that's usually an academic member of staff in your subject, well, not always, but they are there to meet. They will meet with you regularly, at least 2 or 3 times every semester, and just to be there as kind of a point of contact if you've got any personal issues or any issues around your study, and you get to know that person very, very well. And they're the person who I suppose will sort of see you through the journey across the 3 years. Beyond that, though, of course, that it's always expected that on every assignment that you do, every piece of work that you do, for example, you will receive feedback, and you're encouraged to read that feedback and discuss it with your module tutors. All academic members of staff have office hours. They have basically a kind of an open door policy where you can drop in and see them to discuss anything really, but of course usually it's academic issues. So there's always someone there that you can talk to discuss either personal issues or to discuss maybe issues if you're struggling with a particular module or you're not sure about how, something to do with one of the concepts or one of the ideas. There's always kind of academic members of staff that you can speak to. Beyond that, of course, Keele itself has some fantastic resources. So, for example, we have the English Language Learning Unit, I think it's called, which is, where you can go and maybe discuss your writing if you're struggling maybe with writing or reading critical texts. We have something as well called Kite, which deals with who have people that work there, where you can go and do sort of drop-in sessions and discuss maybe if you're struggling with literature reviews or you're struggling with some of the skills that are necessary. So support networks, not just within the school and the personal tutor system, which works very, very well, but also more broadly across the university. And I do think that most students feel really, really supported when they're here at Keele, because there's always someone, whether that's an academic or whether that's someone more pastoral, that you can go and speak to. And certainly if you're struggling with any academic work on the course or you're not sure about something, there's always your module leader, there's your personal tutor, there's the course, the program director, me in this case, who you can go and speak to about any of the issues that you may have. So there's always lots and lots of people who you can discuss. And as well, of course, there's also the people that you're on the course with. And one of the things that we do in education, certainly, and I know this is true of the other programs, is that we really do encourage students to work together, to think together, to form a cohort, and to form friendship groups and to form WhatsApp chat groups and Facebook groups, and to really kind of, form a subject group with an identity so they can support each other as well. And certainly we find this, for example, now, and we have a placement module in local schools, and we find it there, students really kind of not just sharing lists, but sharing experiences and sharing ideas. And some of our assignments are constructed so that students work together when they produce the projects. So you've got support networks from the staff, you've got support networks within the university, but you've also got the support networks of your peers, which we also try and really strongly encourage.
Yeah, brilliant. So it is really embedded across the
Absolutely.
and it is reflected, I suppose, in our high student satisfaction scores and the rates.
Sorry, Jill, just to say as well that one of the other things, if you are anxious about, say, because the big question when you come to university is, how hard will it be? Will I cope? How difficult is it? And that's a perfectly legitimate question. I think we've all suffered from that, when we were students. I certainly did. And what we try and do within our first year modules certainly is to kind of embed those study skills. So to make you think about, well, how do I read a journal article? How do I search for literature? How do I use the library? All those questions, which can be quite overwhelming and daunting if you've not done it before, we try and embed those within our first year modules. And I know other programs do the same as well.
Brilliant. That's great. And I can see Tony nodding. So I think that's the same for the criminology courses too. So we're just into the final minute or so, Rebecca. So I'd just like to come back to you. Could you perhaps just wrap up for us, perhaps what the school's about and why a student might want to consider the School of Social, Political and Global Studies at Keele?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, George. I think what we've talked about a lot today is the skills and the employability offer and the kind of richness of what we offer. And that is all absolutely crucial to what we do. It is about coming to study in a small, beautiful, well-connected place where people know your name. I mean, that's one of the key things, that we're big enough in space and small enough in population to really have good, strong relationships and to support our students here. But I suppose one question for a student thinking about applying to study sociology, criminology or education at Keele is it's those bigger questions that John was talking about. It's the why, isn't it? And I think that's the thing that I want to leave people with is, these social issues and questions that we have about what education is, about what crime is, about what society is, are never more important than they are at the moment. We've seen in the last year, the last 9 months, the challenges that we've faced with schooling, the challenges that we've faced with rising rates of domestic violence, the challenges that we've faced with working at home and what home private space means in the context where society has had to close down its public spaces. And I think if you're the kind of person who has that curiosity about the world, then that's the main reason to study at university and to come and join us in one of our subjects, because it's that sense of, at that precious limited time that we have to work out what's going on, that university is really about. And I think that's what we want. We want students who bring that curiosity with them, and hopefully we can help light a fire under that and see where it takes them. So.
Brilliant, thank you. I think that really summarises the session really well. So that does conclude this session. So thank you very much for joining us, and also thank you to our panel for their insights into the School of Social, Political and Global Studies at Keele. If you have got any questions at all, or you would like to learn more about our programmes, then you can chat to our staff and students on our website via a platform called Unibuddy. So please do check that out. But thank you very much for joining us, and we really hope to see you at Keele sometime in the future soon. Thank you.